We are glad to welcome our next speaker, Dominique Conteh. She's Head of Compliance at the BBC. A seasoned leader, she's responsible for developing and directing the delivery of the compliance strategic plan, as well as leading the execution of the organisation's compliance programme across the BBC. Her compliance experience spans numerous industries, including the telecommunications, media, legal services and gambling industry. On ethics and compliance, she says, without accountability, an organisation's efforts to strengthen its compliance culture will fail to drive sustainable business outcomes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a fascinating few days, and although it's a shame that I can't be with you all in person, I'm sure you can agree there are definitely some benefits to not having to travel abroad to an international conference. What with the delays, the queues and cancellations, and frankly, not knowing who is accountable for any of them, which of course is my subject today. Not the travel issue, accountability. And ultimately, as compliance leaders, we will look at how we can build a culture of accountability within our organisation and enable organisations to continue to thrive accordingly. Now, whether you're a compliance leader, a CEO, or an employee sitting elsewhere within your organisation, if the very word accountability has the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, don't worry, you're in good company. In fact, fewer words in corporate vernacular induce a tighter wince than accountability. According to a recent workplace study, 91% of employees would say that effectively holding others accountable is one of their company's top leadership development needs. And 82% of managers would acknowledge that they have limited to no ability to hold others accountable successfully. We know this stuff matters, yet despite this, time and time again, we struggle to turn good intentions into progress. I'm afraid I don't have all the answers. In fact, I may not have any of them. This is critical, but complex. But what I hope I can do is introduce the whole concept of accountability in a new way that allows us collectively to delve into the dense fog around the subject and start to create some clarity and a benchmark for moving forward. So let's start first with the fundamental question. What is accountability? Well, therein lies a key problem. Accountability often means different things to different people. For some, it means being prepared to take the blame or knowing who to point your finger at when things go wrong. For others, it's taking personal responsibility, whether that be for a piece of work, a task, and being answerable for their decisions, actions, and/or outcomes, whether positive or negative. Most employers don't feel it necessary to define accountability. They presume everyone already knows what it means. Unfortunately, when leaders fail to create common language for what accountability means, employees come to the table with their own notions. And that kind of misunderstanding can lead to a whole host of issues, not least a justification for misconduct. Now, whether one is willing to be accountable will depend on many variables and factors, of course, from the perceived importance of whatever it is the individual is required to be accountable for, the consequences associated with failing to do something, a person's reputation, all of these and more. But there's something bigger at play than any of these individually, something that is not often taken into consideration, and that is the collective impact of people's social and psychological environments. You've all heard people claim organizational culture eats strategy for breakfast, or organizational culture kills strategy. But what about an organization's culture and indeed its climate and their impact on accountability? It's commonly referred to as the way we do things round here. Organizational culture is comprised of the shared beliefs, expectations, values, and norms that govern the way that people behave in an organization. An organizational climate, on the other hand, refers to the attitudes and feelings that really characterize life in an organization. Taken together, culture and climate create unique social and psychological environments within an organization. And it is these social and psychological environments that have the greatest influence on accountability. Edgar Sheen, a pioneering scholar in the field of organizational culture, understood just how much of an enormous impact an organization's environment could have on employee behavior. Sheen describes what he calls unconscious assumptions. Those are, rarely ever considered, inherently taken for granted traits of an organization. These unconscious assumptions can contradict stated policies, for example. Take the organization that has an explicit focus on complying with internal processes and policies. Yet, unbeknown to it, this is combined with it giving off implicit signals that it's okay to fudge the numbers to meet the team's aggressive Q4 sales targets. Over time, employees become acclimatized to these implicit signals and may not even be conscious that they exist. And it is my belief that accountability is impacted most by these implicit signals. When I see organizations dealing with flagrant accountability issues, their environment tends to fall into, although not exclusively, one of three camps. I call these the ostrich, the excuser, and the pointer environment. The ostrich environment, as you can imagine, is where the organization works in a culture of denial. They know that problems exist, and wherever possible, they ignore them. It's pretty extreme, but in corporate terms can be fatal. There are a number of well-known ostrich environments, publicly documented ones as well. But I think one of the best has to be an American energy company that ceased operation in 2007. A business full of alphas, where talent was worshipped above all else. This bred the type of environment where if you didn't actually succeed, you had to look successful. Fortunately, every hire was a corporate predator. Staff couldn't and wouldn't admit fallibility. And the business itself, being no more a collection of these people, couldn't admit when it was failing. It hid debts, mistakes, even had senior executives using fraudulent financial accounting practices to inflate the company's revenue. This led to the biggest auditing failure on record. Culturally, the ostrich simply kept its head in the sand to avoid anyone being accountable for anything. Then second, the excuser environment. In environments like these, there are rules in place, sure, and a culture in which they are meant to be followed. But what soon becomes very clear, the disparate standards applied across the organization. One set of rules that apply to some people and another set of rules that apply to a select few. These privileged few receive special treatment that, in effect, excused, allowed to break the very rules that are being enforced so visibly elsewhere, and without consequence. Environments like these send out big messages to employees, particularly junior members. That message, that an individual and what they can do for an organization is far more important than ethical values such as fairness and accountability. And last, but by no means least, my personal favorite, the pointer environment. In this environment, it does what it says on the tin. organizations that encourage a culture of finger-pointing. When things go wrong, it quickly becomes more about finding the culprit than understanding the problem. Employees know this, and as a result, they try and avoid taking responsibility for, quite frankly, anything. 3 different environments, each blocking us from our ultimate goal of positive accountability. Okay, so what? Well, what I hope is starting to become clear is that we cannot approach the challenges of building accountability within our organization separately from its environment. They are inextricably linked. So often, when accountability issues arise, be it in the context of misconduct, compliance management failings, or something as simple as non-delivery of work to timelines that have serious ramifications for businesses, I see companies jump straight into fixing mode. That is, fixing the issue at hand without ever going back to the very environment that allowed the problem to grow in the first place. So let's get positive. If we know that people will become more accountable, if we can create the type of environment where accountability can thrive, what can we do to start building accountability within our organization? Well, with the single caveat that this is neither definitive nor exhaustive, here are a few positive steps. Number 1, establishing a clear definition of what accountability means to you as a business. For compliance leaders, that means sitting down with senior management and asking some very difficult questions, such as, what are our expectations for accountability? How should accountability show up in this organization? What does the business look like at its best from an accountability perspective? Is it a strong sense of ownership and responsibility for one's work? Or do you want employees to express vulnerability and admit when things don't go according to plan? Think about the types of behaviors that are displayed when an employee is being accountable for their work and their actions. Does that behavior differ according to seniority? Second, get comfortable with asking questions about and continuously looking into whether your organization's existing practices act as an enabler for your definition of accountability to show up and play out, or as a hindrance. A great way to get this insight is by using engagement tools, such as employee surveys, to gain a deeper sense of employee perception. This insight will help you understand where you potentially need to focus your attention, enable you to map out where you are versus where you want to be, and design a roadmap for necessary changes. Third, it might sound silly, but what we really need to ensure that we're doing is embracing a culture of transparency, open communication, and feedback. These are pivotal components of a highly accountable organization. In doing so, you will encourage employees to speak out about misconduct. Similarly, in doing so, you will embolden people to raise their hands when issues arise, when mistakes are made. Make it clear that issues and mistakes do happen, but shouldn't be hidden. Fourth, consistent discipline. We've seen time and time again where employers don't apply the same level when it comes to disciplinary action consistently across the board. Inconsistency is risky. Not only can it reflect poorly on your culture in the eyes of employees. But as we've seen, it can also reflect badly in the eyes of the general public, regulators. Every situation, disciplinary situation, will no doubt have different nuances. In addition, the people in your organization who are making the decisions, once it's been determined that a breach has occurred, will, of course, come to the table with their own perspectives. Nevertheless, if efforts to building accountability are to have any chance of success, then consistency and fairness, particularly as it relates to disciplinary action, is key. Compliance leaders can really help in this context by helping the business establish a disciplinary action framework to really drive greater consistency when it comes to disciplinary action decision-making. Next, you want to be really, really clear about your expectations for accountability, communicating this unambiguously to employees across the organization. In this context, it is really very important that every single one of your leaders are singing from the same hymn sheet, as inconsistent messages can leave room to misinterpretation. Next, accountability will flourish in an environment of trust and psychological safety. This one is a big one. People will feel safe where there is trust. They will interact with people without suspicion. Employees who enjoy psychological safety will be more willing to open up about their mistakes, more willing to learn from them. So this is really key. And finally, if you are going to continue to invest and improve your environment, if you are going to continually assess and monitor how well you're doing, then building accountability is something that needs to be on the main agenda item at the top table and discussed regularly. That top table is the board's table. It's a long list, I'm afraid, and there's more to add. No compliance team can create this sort of environment on its own, nor can most senior executives without their compliance team. So if you're a CEO listening to this, or another senior executive, I implore you to ensure that compliance is taken on this journey. Give them a seat at the table. Accountability isn't easy. Creating the right environment where it can thrive, even harder. But when companies get it right, the data is clear. They outperform by 40% across employee loyalty, innovation, and growth. What's more, employees are 89% less likely to observe significant business misconduct compared to their counterparts in lower accountability cultures. Finally, they will also report misconduct at a rate 1.5 times higher as well. Thank you.